needs to hear this language and this practice of artists who are both kind of, in one way, saying we think differently. And it will be a great shame if the art world runs away from it and say, no, we'll do something else. Because if they do that, they may end up also creating another institution. A parallel, equally strong, and probably then equally in need of destruction institution. So I think it acknowledges as part of the history of art that there will be that dialogue and tussle all the time.
So just to shift the conversation a little bit towards artistic practice, because that's what we're talking about, the conversation that we also want to bring to the idea of understanding an artist and an artist's status in this conversation. And I wanted to read something that Jared had written in an essay he wrote for a show called Double Bind, The Art of the South Asian Diaspora. And it's interesting how you talk about your practice, Jared. And I'm just going to read a bit of it, and then maybe you can speak to that. He said, "In reality, my here moves with me. It moves as I move from place to place. And the people, the languages, the beliefs, the contexts all shift. The algorithms change, and one set of either or binaries is replaced by another. And I end up belonging to many us's and many them's simultaneously. I think it is more useful to think of diaspora as a rubric or a lens like queer, which complicates oversimplified categories of identity while resisting and critiquing the vast structures that seek to put and keep people in boxes. Diaspora can be used as a proposition that reconfigures identity as a verb, as a shifting constellation of inheritances, affinities, and performances." And I wanted to bring this up precisely because, I think you've had a lot of experience working in India, working in New York, and living in Toronto, and these are spaces artistically and curatorially that you moved with, and I like the idea of carrying it there with me. So could you then speak a little bit to that?
Sure, and this is where that idea of context changes. And growing up in Toronto, moving to New York, having a father that's North Indian, having a mother that's Filipino and Spanish, these strange categories that kind of chase me everywhere can be quite strange. And so I was asked to partake in this exhibition, as I often am, artwork of the diaspora, what's happening in the diaspora. And so instead of just saying no, which I might have, because that was something that was maybe a little more important to me a few years ago in this particular dialogue, I thought, no, maybe I'll say yes, but then I'll put more questions back to the curator. And so I put more questions back to the curator. She was really open to it. And I said, okay, well, all the artists in the show, maybe we should just reinvestigate whether or not this is actually a viable or interesting term for us as artists. What does it actually do for us? What is it not? So this came in response to that. So you're being, as an artist in North America, you're often asked to represent your race if you're of color. And that can be very problematic, very challenging, because, an artist, there's this strange, invisible, hegemonic structure that protects artists that are just artists. And they're normally following the American-centric canon, right? So they follow it within that power structure. And then if you're of color, you're a woman, you're queer, you're anything other than that, there's an abbreviation in front of you. So you're a woman artist, you're a South Asian artist, you're an Indian artist, who knows which you are, right? So from a certain lens, like we were talking about before, in the 90s, it was kind of important to sort of fight for our space. I don't know, it's just how it was that everybody was fighting for their space, and you kind of had to fight for it as well, otherwise somebody would just encroach on your territory in a weird way. But now, what does it mean later, right? There's so many people who've opened up this dialogue. And what you were saying earlier about, at the LA Museum, how there's a need and a desire for just more intelligent curation, that it's This, I feel, has been happening in New York in very small pockets. It happens in Toronto sometimes, in different places. I find it's been happening. The opposite has also been happening, which is really problematic also, is you get a bunch of people who are not invested at all saying, okay, we need to have more brown people in here. So let's just find a bunch of brown people making brown stuff and put them in the gallery, and then this is good. See, we're doing stuff. And you have these tokenish kind of shows, which is part of what we were talking about before. The overwhelming practice of this happening in North America and Europe is it's just gross. Really horrible exhibitions done by people who are not necessarily that invested in everybody's happy. Or not everybody. The artists aren't happy, and the people who are invested in these issues aren't happy, but some of these curators, they are seen as cutting edge because they're going to India. And they're doing a 5-day tour of all of India and finding like the same 20 artists that the same 2 people that they asked are telling them to go look at. So this has become very problematic in presenting Indian work made by Indian cultural producers, abroad. And they're normally of a certain class. They're normally within the contemporary rubric. We don't go into crafts. We don't go into all different forms of material culture. We don't go into all the different ways that work has been made and is made every day and has been made for a long time. So there's that, that aspect that happened too. And in the U.S., we're also there's this whole majority-minority sort of thing. So I don't know if you know about this, but there is, I guess it said that in 2050 that there would be more people of color in the U.S. than white people. What's that? And then every time I hear about it again, it's like 2040. Well, now it's already here, or it's here in California. But people from both sides of this, if there are only 2 sides, let's just say, people who are afraid of immigrants or are afraid of losing their power, they're using this as a way to drum up fear votes and to drum up anxiety so that they can get people to do what they want. And then people of color are saying, okay, we're going to take over soon. So let's really get ready. So, but it's not that simple, but it is useful in some ways because there's just no choice but to correct some of the inequalities that have happened through colonization, through epistemological violence, through just the very nature of our history, which is so biased.
Thank you. I wanted to open it up to questions from the audience. So does anyone do you have a question? Yes.
I have 2 comments.
Please introduce yourself before.
Sorry.
There's a simple courtesy you have to do.
Sorry, I'm Abel. I'm from India. I have 2 comments. One on identity. I want to recall what Ambedkar once wrote in his Annihilation of Caste, where he says wherever a Hindu goes, he takes his caste with him. And he talks about how democracy in India is a structure and heap of tongue. So essentially, I see South Asian diaspora identity as something, bones, a collection of bones. You're just draping it with a South Asian cloth, and you're saying, yes, we're all marginalized, we are being racialized identity. I think the marginality of the identity should be put into more question, like who is, what essentially are you fighting for? Like, that within, I'll talk specific to Indian identity, Indian Americans, within Indian Americans you can see caste stations pretty clearly. They just take their caste organizations from India to US or wherever else. And you have to see that this Ambedkar also narrates an incident where the students in Colombia in the flight, they will sit with him, they will eat with him, and once they come in India, they just don't touch him. They say you are an untouchable. So this kind of hypocrisy runs through Indian diaspora, and the grotesqueness of Indian diaspora was visible when Modi was there, and yeah, the identity itself should be questioned. I mean, I don't think you can't use the bogey of colonialism and racism to simply use the South Asian identity. You are a Brahmin, or you are whatever, Kshatriya. That identity you can't escape, and you assert that identity. It's not like you are moving away from it. So identity is a very complex thing, and I think what I might be generalizing, but what a Brahmin aims for is to be treated on par with a white. He will probably discriminate in the same way against a black and against an African American. So just what Gandhi did. Gandhi did in Africa, we don't want to be treated with the Scarface, we want to be treated with white. So that's what his fight for. So how ethical is that fight? And we need to question that. That's an identity. Second one is art. Whenever we say art needs more space, I think we also have to question which art needs more space. What kind of art are you asking for space? I mean, you can't relegate that question after getting the space. It's like Indians saying, let the British go and then we'll solve our caste question. No, you will not. Therefore, I think whenever we're asking for space, we need to specify that we're asking for space for subversive art. I would rather have a space for Kathak than some Brahminized art like appropriated art like Bharatanatyam or something like that. So we need to specify which art needs space.
I just want to respond to that last one quickly. Subversive art does not demand space. Subversive art takes space. Okay, it doesn't need your generosity with your space. Other kinds of art need space. Yeah.
No comment.
Sure. I mean, the first thing you were saying. So there's this idea of intersectionality that's kind of come into the discourse of how we look at privilege in different contexts. So somebody can very well be marginalized and Brahmin. Somebody can be heteronormative and queer. Somebody can be rich and prejudiced against at the same time. So it's not just this either or binary, right? And hypocrisy, of course, it exists across the world in many different ways, and probably most easily, I don't know if most easily, but it seems most easily among people who do have certain kinds of power, right? Because they can choose not to pay attention while still reaping the rewards of their power. But I think that somebody can actually have power in one context and simultaneously not have power in the same context, or move into another room and completely lose power. So I would complicate your original observation by saying that each individual has many different positions, right, at the same time.
Hi, I'm Vijay from here as a visitor. My question is to Sadanand. You were talking about the space for the mainstream and arts being, should not be different. One should go out with the other. I often, as a literary I wonder if there was some kind of a channel or a radio channel where there was always something about literature, going on some discussion, is my expectation okay, or do you think the mainstream channel should go for literary stuff and all that?
Well, I'm not sure I understood your question fully, but what I'm basically speaking about is this imaginary in the media today that the most important issues are issues related to high finance capital and to parliamentary democracy. And no other issues are important. Whereas I personally think the most important issues in the world today are cultural issues. Not art issues, but cultural issues. And they are very, very closely intertwined with finance capital and with politics. And you need a space to excavate that, you need a space to unpack that. What is this thing that is hidden? If we say a certain kind of fear is lurking in the Indian subcontinent today, like if you read today's Kanak Mani Dikshit article, it's a very interesting piece about how every single nation in the subcontinental shelf, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's India, whether it's Bangladesh, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's Nepal, a certain kind of hegemonic power is taking over and keeping people's voices down, including the intellectuals. There's a kind of silence building over. Some people say, oh, why should we participate in this? You know, it's a futile debate. My intelligence is too much higher than all this. I will not participate. Some people feel cowed down. Some people want something from the system, so they don't speak out. So you're in a peculiar situation where, I mean, I did mention Jean-Paul Sartre earlier, but he was like this towering personality across Europe, whose voice, even though he was French nationally, he could speak to the German government when the Baden-Meinhof group was incarcerated in jail with even the death sentence. His voice reached out. Do we have a single intellectual in this region who can speak to various governments across national boundaries? We don't. Can one Indian intellectual speak to Rajapaksa? Speak out? Can one Indian intellectual speak out to Nawaz Sharif or to the leaders in the region? We can't. Or even to our own prime minister, we can't. We don't have. There's a certain intellectual stunting that is going on. It's a major issue. It's a front page issue. It's an editorial page issue. And this is what I mean by the mainstream. That space needs to open out. But it's being deliberately cramped. I think most Indian leaders are being, in one sense, infantilized. And that's the process that is going on. So it's a political stunting and an intellectual stunting which can be addressed only through, what do you call, battering the ramparts, or the Mao's slogan, just batter the ramparts, and we don't see that happening. Basically, it could be radio, it could be a journal, it could be a newspaper, it could be television, it could be anything, and it could be the other spaces that Meenakshi was talking about, the social media, it could be just a collective webcasting tool like this can do things which probably a newspaper can't do, etc., etc.
It's okay. I'm Sariyu from. Hello, I'm Sariyu from Asian College of Journalism. I just had something to add. So we're moving into closed spaces because of technology, maybe, which is making it more difficult for us to express. And I feel it is also because there's a common perception that art and artists are very complex and difficult to understand, and that's why there's this aversion towards going to art galleries and stuff like that. Yeah, that's what I want to add.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. It's another thing to be feared.
One is actually a kind of comment about how do we really build the audience and things like that. I think one infrastructure that we need to seriously address is the question of the link between education and the world of art, which has been, I don't think our governance has taken enough care to do that, and most of us who are part of the educational institutions are all implicated in it, because I think at least 50% of the audience that you would see in the civilized Western world visiting the museums, it's a mandatory visit of the schools and other institutions where you see them there. you know, so it's kind of geared. That's something that I feel we are missing here. That's just a comment. But my question is actually to Jared, you know, because I'm just thinking, I mean, I think we have kind of butchered the word identity for way too long. Why not call it something like an alliance? You know, where there is this level of consciousness and there is also a level of objective. Because you come together for a particular reason, short term, long term, whatever. So in that context, within the gamut of your experience of alliance building, have South Asians all over the world, especially in Toronto and the US, have they really worked on it the way, I'm just comparing it to the Arab world, for example. You know, I mean, which is something that I miss when I travel, because the South Asian artists still want to really be warmed up with all, I mean, nothing against the classical dance or music or anything, but you know, it is that which they want to cling on to, rather than to something more experimental or more political and more, you know, whereas you wouldn't see the Palestinian or an Iraqi artist, you know, they don't lose that perspective, you know, even though Palestine has been a nation, a people without a nation for way so long, too long, let's say like Sri Lanka. And if you see the Sri Lankans in Toronto, I mean, this is the feeling I get.
Yeah, no, identity is an annoying word, and it's been overused. And it can be really problematic and stripped of all currency whatsoever. I think that it's important for me to know where I'm from, to know what my affinities are, to know what I want to get out of the situation, to know what context I'm entering into, but not take it too seriously. I mean, sometimes it's deadly serious, but it's not that serious at the same time. So, identity politics and that stuff, I'm the first one to get irritated by it. At the same time, you see the necessity for the correction of history, which is just been grossly misrepresented, and misrepresents people from India to such a high degree that it shapes the way people see, that it shapes what's in their brains when it comes to thinking about Indians, and when they look through their eyes, they see the most reductive stereotypes imaginable. I'm confronted with this on a daily basis when I'm over there. So identity exists, right? Or these issues, it's a strange kind of rubric that addresses these issues. Problematic term, of course, South Asian. All these terms are problematic, right? They can be problematized, and they should be. They shouldn't be so fixed, but they also are just placeholders as well. They're shorthand as well. But I also agree that certain terms have currency for a certain amount of time, and they exist within a political climate of that time, a social climate of that time. And once that time is over, are those terms valuable still? That's in some ways what we were doing there in that discussion of the
No, but why isn't there an alliance between, let's say, a South Asian and a Palestinian? You know?
There are absolutely, there are huge alliances. So even though we've been talking about India in context in relation to the diaspora, I mean, I think most of the curatorial projects that I've ever done have overlapped with the African American community, with the Latino community. The film screenings that I've coordinated were within the Bonanza region. In New York, it's very different. I mean, it's just, everybody's just all together in another way. So when somebody comes and puts one of these either or Indian diaspora binaries on this very nuanced and layered experience, you then wonder, well, is that useful? Is that not? So I'm asking the same questions that you are. And there are across the board, just on a daily basis, connections across that have nothing to do with identity, but have to do with affinity. You know, they may not be institutionalized. They just may be friendships. or they may be an exhibition, or they don't have to be so serious.
Actually, in my experience, this is true even of the classical dance world. In Toronto, for example, you have this wonderful dancer, Roger Sinha, who works with Native Canadian Americans, with black communities, with a whole range of other Asian communities, and constantly the theme being color of skin. And fascinating range of choreographies is created. Or in America, the collaboration between Ananya Chatterjee and Jabole Zolar, the fantastic native black American. I mean, those collaborations are very much there. But one thing I would like to kind of also shift focus to is collaborations that originate from these locations and then come here and want to collaborate. For example, famous examples, Peter Brook and Mahabharata. That's a cross-cultural transnational art practice. Or Philip Glass and Satyagraha. Or Ariane Grushkin and 1857. Famous international cross-cultural collaborations where Indian themes were taken, Indian music was taken, I'm saying Indian very deliberately. I don't believe they're Indian, they're global products, but they come with this. The exoticization of what is Indian and then marketing it in another location. This is a practice that is common even today. We saw Midsummer Night's Dream and what was done to it with so-called Indian collaboration. Now, what does one do there? Where the entire practice is unequal to begin with, where the practitioners are coming with a kind of funding which cannot be generated in this part of the world, and therefore have access to material, access to just about everything that an Indian artist would not have access to, and then they are marketed in a manner that many here would find offensive, and so on and so forth. So this kind of distorted art practice that emerges from there, but which is so big in the art market space that very little opposition comes to it, or very little resistance comes to it. So these are parallel activities that are going on. There's a different kind of levels at which these things happen, and I think we need to respond to all this.
We have time for maybe one or two more questions.
So, I would like you to comment upon the this geopolitical dimension of this India's cultural appeal. I think we can see that as India grows, as India's economic and political power grows internationally, its cultural appeal also grows. And in the concept of soft power, it's really important, I think, the power of culture that India has. So, would you like to comment upon that, especially in US and all? Nowadays, you can see that more and more Indian art forms, or India-related themes, or maybe US, even Indian stereotypes also, in US TV shows and all. It's coming up more and more. So, what are your comments?
It seems that whenever there's economic advantage between two countries, or it seems that they become more interesting to curators or to the media. In my opinion, I remember years ago Japan was very, very interesting in North America because a lot of trade was being done. The BRIC countries were very interesting for the last little while. And I remember as soon as Iran started even coming into conflict, people were very interested in Iranian artists. It's strange the way that these things work, but when things are brought into the media lens or the media interest, for a variety of different reasons, they become culturally interesting as well. And curators then kind of say, oh, we're going to do an Iranian show. Or we're going to be, we're looking into Japanese culture, and then some certain Japanese lyrics come into music, in popular culture, which is kind of a strange thing. So yeah, it greases the wheels of capitalism, increases sort of political relations as well, you know. And yeah, so I think India is very, you know, very interesting in certain context. It was particularly interesting for the North American market and for the European market, probably 2006 to 2008, when all these speculative investors were looking at India and the Indian art world and saying, okay, this is the next China, as far as art investment was concerned. So in that period, you had this boom of foreign collectors buying everything they could get. You had artists that weren't terribly great showing at the Pompidou because curators would be coming in and saying, oh, we need to represent India, but without, you know, terrible investment in what that means, you know. And so, but then it crashed, and so then it crashed in about 2008, and then India wasn't as interesting. I mean, it's not that it's not interesting, but it's just a particular kind of market that has an appetite for things that it is very fickle. So yeah.
All I can say to that is that a very well-known Indian politician recently said that one of the great dangers facing us today is climate change. Yoga can solve it.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
I'm Devi Tyagarajan. I just wanted to make one comment on museums before I give Jada the question. You talked about high capital. I read by ICOM, which is the International Council on Museums. They just published figures for U.S. museums. And they said that U.S. museums contribute $23 billion annually to the economy and employ 400,000 people. So they have found it very necessary to put museums in economic terms so that they can use it, be in the mainstream. And the question I have for Jared is, you know, New York has always been known as having a very tight coterie of art critics. I wondered if, two things, if a space has grown to, you know, let critics of color, if you want to say that, come in with a much more unbiased look at art. And I also wanted to know whether you feel that you as a person of South Asia or India or whatever you want to say, that your art is judged by different categories. I mean, if a mainstream art critic looks at your art, do they say, oh, I can't judge it like I would a normal artist or a Western artist? Are there special categories that they look at?
Sure. And so I think that criticism in New York is not terribly interesting for me right now, and it's not necessarily useful for me as an artist because it is still quite biased and it is still quite problematic. Just recently, in the New York Times, there was a very controversial, very Eurocentric writing done on an exhibition that was done at PS1, and it was reinforcing all of these stereotypes of African American cultural production. It was horrible. You know, thinking this was 2013, so these situations still happen time and time again. You know, there's Jerry Saltz, there's all of these people that write, but they don't really address some of the cultural dimensions in their own privilege, and when they do, it's kind of, and I'm just not terribly interested in their writing to begin with, aside from racism. So, are there more critics of color? I think there are more writers of color and more curators of color. But just being of color doesn't necessarily mean that you will be open and interesting as well. I mean, there are people of color who are just as close-minded, if not as close-minded or colonial as you know, their counterparts from different races. And so, do I think that it comes into the way that people read my work? All the time. All the time, and some of the time. So, so if you are, for example, being looked at for an exhibition, and people just want to look at your work, and they see your body, and they see what you look like, then all of these other questions start coming up about what are the other contexts involved in your work, and often they can project onto you. So for example, I was doing a series of pieces that were based on Skype glitches. I was interested in some of the stuff you're talking about right now. How do we define culture now that we have things like Skype? We can contact people all over the world on a daily basis, and I had some pictures of glitches in Skype. And the response that I got was, are these about surveillance? Are these about terrorism? So people, without asking, very quickly see your body. And if I have, if you have a little bit of facial hair, and you look, you're vaguely from the Middle East or from South Asia, you can be, it's very charged.
Truly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think there's a fear, and there's a lot of fear of the other in the culture as well. So yes, most of the time you end up being an ambassador for somebody else's projection of what you're not. Yeah, I would like that not to be the case, and I mean, I've known this to only be the case going through 3 institutions, going through the National College of Art and Design in academia, and through Cooper Union in New York, and going through Yale University. They were all very similar in their lack of knowledge or care when it came to artwork or cultural production outside the canon. Or when they did see somebody that was other, it would have to only be about that othering position, right? So if you're queer, your work has to just like read queerness, or if you're black, your work has to just like be the stereotypical idea that those professors or those critics understand as being black. So yes.
We have 2 more questions. Martin, yeah?
Hi, thank you so much for that great discussion. My name is Martin. I teach in the Humanities Department at IIT Madras. And I just wanted to sort of follow up from your last comment, Jared, about a couple of things that I think this panel has skipped around, but not really touched much upon, that I wanted to hear some more about. Mainly the fetish character of the art object and the artist. And I sort of feel like what has been not touched upon much in this discussion is that fetish character, as well as left unexamined the mechanisms of neoliberalism, which we spoke about, but we don't talk much about, we're not examining. We're saying within the mainstream, how is it that you sort of create presence for art in the world? And if I would connect that to your search for audiences, and how it seems to me that the sense of an audience itself is so fragmented, then could you speak a little bit about art, not just in spaces for art, but in the world, not in the sense of is it subversive or not subversive? How do you make connections between art, education, people's ability to engage with it, things of that sort? And also given the fact that it's so easy to contain identity, to contain the art object in particular spaces, so that you leave unexamined substantial problems outside of it. Have your little play in the museum space, you do your little subversive act over here, and we'll talk about it on these panels, but that allows the mechanisms of neoliberalism, so to speak, to not engage substantially with questions that art is dealing with. And so you can delineate these spaces in your search for audiences. So then can you speak about how to locate the art and the artist in the world?
Whoa.
Did you want to add?
Yeah, can I just quickly add to that? I'm Milind, I also teach at the Department of Humanities and IIT Madras. And I just want to add to the question actually also raised by Mange about education and what Madan just referred to. I think also in terms of school education at a very basic level, where we begin to make the distinction artificially between the sciences being macro discipline of the mind, and the arts being a good fantasy where you can just relax and recuperate and then come back to the basic task, which is science. I mean, that kind of separation itself, I think, starts to alienate and the would-be audience from the world of art. That was my point, which I maybe could elaborate on in conjunction with Mathi's point. And secondly, I just wanted to make a slightly flippant point that that the messaging used in making books by Kalidas was love.
Not ERP or cloud.
So should I start? Okay. So, Mati, thank you for the series of questions. I'll try to address a little bit of it, and you can help me along the way. I mean, the idea of the fetish object and art functioning as a product or in relationship to high capitalism or to capitalism in general. Collectors from within the 1%, people who control and have just loads of money. Art and the type of art that we have been talking about, which is only one small part of art, is often, it has always been related to a lot of money and a lot of power, from royalty to religious organizations to wealthy landowners, collectors, all sorts of hedge fund people out in the world. And so it is inextricably linked to that economy, right? And I have all these stories that I shouldn't have in my head as well about how this is a way for very wealthy people in New York to exchange black money as well, right? Having one piece of art and having another piece of art and having it switched through closed room sort of storage units in the bottom of Chelsea. So I mean, it's quite related to it. If you want to talk about the nonprofit industrial complex, right? So a lot of the museums are quite some of the greatest or financially irresponsible organizations, who have the most amount of money, maybe because they're the most financially or ethically questionable organizations, and that money comes in through nonprofits, comes in through museums. There's tax incentives for that. So one has to then figure out, okay, do I want to be part of this museum that's getting its money from this corporation that I'm actually really against what they did, related to 2008 and the stock market crash. And this is just part of the whole Fordist sort of neoliberal capitalist whitewashing of money, which can happen. Then identity as an extension, the exotic object, the tourist object, mixed in with people who want to collect the artist's soul. This idea of expression and the pain and the angst of an artist. People love these stories, that I just have no money and I can do something. And then have something authentic, and how that overlaps with something authentic and brown, or authentic and other already, and authentic and just exotic in general, is also inextricably linked. And that becomes another form of capital, and then art places, art and showing art out of white box contexts. I think there's a lot of some of the things that I like that we were talking about earlier, that happen across the global south. Artist-initiated projects, do-it-yourself projects, guerrilla-style projects. Somebody performing on the street, somebody setting up a residency, inviting people, somebody doing something with permaculture or gardening. You don't even need an audience, actually. This whole idea of audience and the fetish of being looked at and the ego in relationship to that kind of practice is only one small fraction of what I consider to be artistic practice. And for myself, in particular, I find that objects and fetish objects in white box spaces to be useful to some aspects of my personal and spiritual growth, to find meaning through these processes and these objects. But it's a very small part of what I do, and so curation or programming or just going out and protesting can be much more useful. Education or spending time with younger people as well. I mean, there's just a full breadth of experiences to have in life. And education, I don't see separate from art at all. I think that many of the intentions that we have as artists, let's just say I want to be the change, or I want to create some new awareness about an idea. Instead of using materials to put on a canvas to paint it, I can actually just go out and teach a class. It's just very direct. And it might be much more useful, or I could write something and put it in the paper like that. So intention and form aren't necessarily married to certain kinds of spaces.
I think Matangi's question basically is ugly because we are discussing flatlands. We are not going into the bumps and but of course it's the bottom line. I think the movement of financial capital in the world of art, and of course the way the conversation changes when neoliberalism sets in is a major issue. But the only time this will be evident, meaning the rest of the time it's masked, like everything else. The word that you use, the fetish always masks the real relationship. When it is evident, and we can't say that about the Indian context too much because the quantum of financial capital in the Indian art market is not all that huge to make that kind of a difference, to make it perceptible. But in the American context, 1994, 1992 and 2008, the moments when the economy crashes, that's when this whole masala comes out. Where art is, where is corporate houses, all their corridors, full of artwork. Suddenly these shareholders say, what are you guys sitting on dead stock? Dump it. 1992 was happening in a very, very interesting way. Vice chairman, the chairman of corporations somehow never seem to buy art. Like that. It's always vice chairman and their wives who get into this activity. And they always, we don't have them here, but they have art agents in the US, and every company hires an agent, and they tell you that this go to this exhibition, select from here, go from there, look at this catalog, and now of course search the internet for so and so, and buy, because that is investment. It's a good thing. 2 years later, value will appreciate. When the crash happens, all this becomes like money that should be in the stocks and shares of the company, not on the bonds. And they are made to force sell. So in 1992, when a large number of art was dumped, literally dumped onto the pavements of New York, the artists themselves went and bought. They said, I don't want my art to be sold, which I sold to that organization for $25,000. I don't want to sell it for $50 certainly. So they themselves invested, they went and bought, and you could see a lot of people carrying their own works under their armpits and walking around. Interestingly, at that point, local communities stepped in. I know 2 communities in New Jersey who said, look, you guys, you 8 artists are from this area, from New Jersey. We know that you're in deep trouble. We know that your market is completely crashed, and for some time we will be not earning money. We'll offer you an alternative. We have a school nearby. In the school there is a community space. The walls are there. Come and show your work. We'll allow you to keep your work there in our community. However, as a barter principle, come and teach our kids. Don't just wander around in Soho and Chelsea and stuff like that. Come and teach our kids. And this happened, and for the first time artists realized the meaning of connecting with the community, which was part of an older practice. So it kind of came back the hard way. Same thing has happened now in 2008 with a much more intense way where suddenly there's a block. Even the Arabs are not buying art anymore. So what do you do? So where artists have to learn the art. It's not part of art practice. It's not part of healthy gallery practice, for example, to say, look, Baba, I'll exhibit you, but also have 2 conversation sessions with our audiences, go out to our neighboring schools, be available on all the days, do workshops. Very few were available. So they have to learn the hard way. Finance capital always has to learn the hard way. Because it's constantly lurching from disaster to disaster. So they'll learn, I guess.
Thank you so much, Jared, and thank you, Ariel, for being here with us. And thank you all for coming to this discussion and for all of your engaging questions. And I hope that we all get to more panels and lectures. And we have a talk with K.G. Subramanian and Dakshin Chitra on Wednesday the 5th. So
very
please
important. To declare a holiday in school, college.
Yes, Narendra said so. 11 a.m. There you go. So hope to see you all there as well. And thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.